Hello, I'm going to read another story out of the big book of short stories. And this one is called The Ghost at Codlin Castle. There we go. Gran, said Peter, as his grandmother was tucking him up in bed, do you believe in ghosts? Oh, yes, said his grandmother. So, do you know a good ghost story to tell me? Now? Yes. All right. Like a great many ghosts, said Gran, Sir Anthony Appleby was wary of people. It wasn't that they could do him any harm. That had been done ages ago. It was the fuss they made when they came upon him in the winding corridors and steep stone stairways of Codlin Castle. Some screamed and ran. Some stood rooted to the spot, trembling and ashen-faced, and some fainted. But no one ever said a kind word to him. In fact, no one had spoken a word of any kind to him since his death in 1588. In times past, things had not been so bad, for then the only inhabitants of Codlin Castle had been the Appleby family and their servants. All were quite used to the ghost of Sir Anthony, and though they may not have spoken to him, at least they were no trouble to him. That's a picture of him standing on the stairs holding his head. Perhaps he had his head chopped off. Nowadays things were different, for the Appleby fortunes had dwindled over the centuries until finally one of Sir Anthony's descendants had been forced to sell the family castle. Now it was known as the Codlin Castle Hotel, where well-to-do folk came to stay, to sleep in canopied four-posters and to eat rich meals in the medieval banqueting hall. Sir Anthony kept bumping into them in the corridors and stairways, and all of them, it seemed, were frightened of ghosts. A fellow can't get any peace these days, said Sir Anthony grumpily. Like all ghosts, he talked to himself a great deal. One look at me and they lose their heads. And then he allowed himself a smile, for though dressed in the costume of his age, a doublet and hose, flowing cloak, high ruffed collar and sword by his side, he was, as always, carrying his head underneath one arm. For 342 years he had carried it like that, ever since that fateful day when, as one of her courtiers, he had accompanied Queen Elizabeth on a visit to her fleet of ships at Tilbury. On the dockside there was a large puddle, and the Queen stopped before it. Your cloak, Sir Anthony, she said. Sir Anthony had hesitated. Majesty, he said. I may have the heart and stomach of a king, said Queen Elizabeth, but I have the feet of a weak and feeble woman, and I don't want to get them wet. Cast your cloak upon that puddle over yonder. But your Majesty, said Sir Anthony Appleby, it's a brand new coat and it will get all muddy. At which the Queen ordered that he be taken straight away to the Tower of London and beheaded, while Sir Walter Raleigh hastily threw down his own cloak. The years and indeed the centuries slipped by. One sultry summer's night in 1930, the stable clock was striking 12 as the ghost made his way along a stone-flagged passageway in the west wing, his head tucked underneath his left arm. His picture of the Queen sending him to the tower because he wouldn't put his cloak over the muddy puddle for her. With his head tucked underneath his left arm, this was how he usually carried it to leave his sword arm free, although sometimes he changed sides, for the head was quite heavy. Once, a couple of 100 years ago, he had tried balancing it on top of his neck, just for fun, but this had not been a success. A serving girl had come upon him suddenly in the castle kitchens, making him jump so that the head fell off and rolled along the floor, at which the poor girl, a newcomer, had died of fright. Remembering this incident as the 12th stroke sounded on the clock, Sir Anthony stopped opposite a tall glass cheval glass, I don't know what that means, standing in the passage, and taking up his head with both hands, set it carefully above the great ruffed collar. A fine figure of a man, he remarked to his reflection, though I say so myself, and pressing his palms against his ears to keep the head steady, he turned this way and that, the better to admire himself. He could not therefore hear the approach of soft footsteps, but suddenly saw beside his own reflection that of a small girl in pink pyjamas. And there she is. I think the cheval glass is a mirror. Granny didn't know that. "Hello," she said. "Who are you?" So startled was Sir Anthony that he almost dropped his head. My name is Sir Anthony Appleby," he stammered, turning to face the child. "And who, pray, are you, young miss?" "I'm Biffy," said the small girl. "It's short for Elizabeth." That name again, thought Sir Anthony. But at least someone's spoken to me at last. "Why aren't you in bed?" he said. "Too hot," said Biffy. "I couldn't sleep." "Why aren't you?" "Oh, I never sleep," said Sir Anthony. "I'm a ghost, you see." "What fun," said Biffy. "How long have you been dead?" 342 years. "Oh, so that's why you're wearing those funny clothes." "Yes." "Why have you got your hands pressed to your ears? Have you the earache?" No, said Sir Anthony. "Ghosts can't feel pain. It's about the only advantage of being one." "Then why are you holding your head?" said Biffy. "Oh dear," thought the ghost. "If I take off my head, the child will scream or faint or even die of fright. And I do so want her to say a kind word to me. One kind word, and I'm sure I could rest in peace at long last, instead of having to trudge around these winding corridors and steep stone stairways for the rest of my death. Look," he said, "if I tell you a secret, will you promise faithfully not to scream or faint or die of fright?" "I promise." "Well, you see, when I died, it was in a rather unusual way. I mean, it was common enough then, but they don't do it nowadays." "What did they do to you?" "They executed me. They cut off my head, and that's why I'm holding it like this now. I'm just balancing it, you see. It's not attached." "What fun," said Biffy. "Take it off." The ghost's face wore a very worried expression. "You promised not to scream or faint or die of fright, remember?" he said. "Yes," said Biffy. "Don't worry." So Sir Anthony Appleby removed his head, holding it carefully by its long hair, and tucked it under his arm. The small girl in the pink pyjamas clapped her hands in delight. "That's wonderful," she said, and at those words a broad grin of pleasure spread over the bearded features. There he is. "Oh, Sir Anthony Appleby," said Biffy, "you really are the nicest ghost in the whole wide world." And because she was just the right height, she gave him a kiss on the top of his head. Immediately the ghost of Codlin Castle vanished. Biffy looked all around, but there was no sign of him. She looked in the mirror, but saw only her own reflection standing there in her pink pyjamas. So she went back to bed. "Is that the end of the story?" said Peter. "Yes, I suppose it is," said his grandmother, "except that from that day onwards nobody at the Codlin Castle Hotel ever saw the ghost of Sir Anthony Appleby again." "Because he was at peace at last, you mean?" "Yes." "Because the girl said a kind word to him?" "Yes." "Gran," said Peter, "your name's Elizabeth, isn't it?" "Yes, but when I was little I was always called Biffy." That's quite a nice little story, isn't it? Okay, I'll finish that one for now and we'll read another one another time. Let me know if you want something special. Okay then, bye-bye for now.